Good morning, everyone. Of course, one of the ways that we awaken, particularly in our practice, is through koan study. And I wanted to talk about koans today. So what is the Dharma ultimately? It's not separate. And that's one of the key things about koan study, is to realize that we're not separate, is to see through this mind that we create separation between ourselves and others, and even within ourselves. So koan, which is spelled K-O-A-N, is fairly unique to Zen practice, and particularly to Rinzai Zen practice. And the words koan mean a public case. It's like a legal case, a precedent. And a public case is usually a dialogue between a teacher and a student, or between two teachers, or it could be a section of a sutra, which are the writings, or not the writings, but the recorded writings of the Buddha. And is brought forward as an example of a dialogue to help elevate our practice and bring us to realization. And the more we understand the content, the meaning, and the purpose of the dialogue, the more we can deepen the understanding of our own practice. Many years ago, I heard a pop psychologist say that koan practice is what Zen masters use to blow their students' minds. Well, that's kind of somebody who doesn't quite know what koans are might say. But Dogen said it better. Master Dogen, he said, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. And to study the self is to forget the self. So rather than blow your mind, I'd say koans are to forget your mind. There's a famous koan about the dialogue between Bodhidharma and the second ancestor, Eka, second ancestor in China, on the subject of mind. So according to the story, the Eka was standing out in the snow outside of the cave where Bodhidharma was meditating. And he wanted instruction, and Bodhidharma kept ignoring him, and it snowed all night long, and in order to show his determination, Eka stood in the snow, and then he cut off his arm to show his determination, and that got Bodhidharma's attention. And Bodhidharma said, "What do you want?" And he said, "My mind is not at rest. Please pacify it for me." And Bodhidharma said, "Bring me your mind, and I'll pacify it for you." And the second patriarch, Eka, said, "After exhaustively searching, I find the mind is ungraspable." And Bodhidharma said, "Then I have pacified it for you." Or then you could say, then it is pacified. So one of the important points of this koan is to try to understand exactly what they're talking about. So if your teacher, your Roshi or sensei assigns you a koan to study, first thing you have to do is think about it. Don't imagine you're going to sit down and suddenly it's going to come to you in a flash. Think about it. What are they saying? What is motivating them? What's motivating me? What line in the koan is most critical, most important? Master Eka says, mind is ungraspable. He's not saying I can't grasp the mind. He's saying the very nature of mind is that it's ungraspable. He's not saying I've searched exhaustively and I can't find it. He's saying I have searched exhaustively and it is unfindable. It's very different. It's a huge difference, in fact. He's not coming from a point of view like, boy, I don't think I'm ever going to find this. He's coming from, I'm telling you, you can't find this thing. So what are the purpose of koans and why do we study them? Dogen said to forget the self. All of us have this self-grasping ignorance. Our practice is to examine it and investigate the very nature of ignorance that causes us to grab onto this self-image that we have and try to protect it and foster it. So it's not only the self as we perceive it as our own being, but also in relationship to everything else. We want others to admire, adore, love, and cherish us. In one of Dogen Zenji's writings, Fukan Zazengi, he says, if there's a slightest discrepancy, the way is as distant as heaven from earth. If the least like or dislike arises, the mind is lost in confusion. And he goes on to say, when you practice Zazen, sit down and think of non-thinking. And then he says, how do you think of non-thinking? By not thinking. When I first read these lines, I thought when I'm sitting, I shouldn't be thinking. And from my experience, I'm telling you, if you don't think about a koan, whether you're sitting or not sitting, you're not going to penetrate into it. Am I elevating myself and disagreeing with Dogen? I hope not. It's not my intention. Eventually, your koan study will lead to non-thinking, and you should practice non-thinking with your first koan, which is usually, who am I? Or Joshu's mu, which I'll get back to Joshu's mu in a moment. In our practice, I believe thinking has been given a bum rap. There's nothing wrong with thinking. The problem is how we think and what we think of. Have you ever tried to open your eyes and not see? You can stick your fingers in your ears and not hear some things. But I guarantee you, if there's a low rumble and the earth starts shaking, you'll hear it. Even with the best earplugs ever manufactured. So how do you not think? As long as you're alive, the function of the brain is to think, just like the function of the eye is to see. Certainly, there are moments when you don't think, and I've talked about this quite a few times. But my favorite example, is downhill skiers. I mean, they go, I don't know how fast they go, probably 100 miles an hour. More?
Sometimes more.
More than 100 miles an hour going down a mountain with two little pieces of fabricated plastic or wood on your feet. And when you're going at that speed, you have to rely upon all of the years and all of the many times you've practiced going down the mountain for your body wisdom to take over, your body to know what you're doing. If you stop and think, should I twist my ankle this way or my knee that way while you're going down at 120 miles an hour, it'll happen. You're going to have a very dangerous fall. So you can't think. You just have to respond to the feel and the vision of the mountain as you're going down it. You have to become one with the mountain. Every little bump, just a little bump can throw you off if you're not prepared, if your knees aren't flexible enough, and your body to adjust. Or even gymnasts. It's interesting, during the Olympics, Simone Biles withdrew from a lot of the events. She said she got something called the twisties, which I never heard of before. And then for a gymnast, where they're flipping, triple flipping and quadruple twisting when they're in the air, if they lose track of where their body is in space, I mean, they could kill themselves when they land. And that's what twisties are, where you lose your orientation relative to the ground. And people were saying, who don't know better, that she's a quitter. But she did come back, to one event and got a medal. But they expected her to win 5 gold medals. But she knew that she mentally could not do it. And it's something that gymnasts know about, the twisties. And it doesn't have anything to do with thinking. You just can't will yourself to do it. Your body has to know what to do. And it's the same thing in koans. Your body needs to know what you're doing. Now, as some of you know, I have a background in science and solving a scientific problem, and a very profound scientific problem has some similarities to koan practice. I remember reading about Einstein. When he solved a problem, he would first identify what the problem was. If you don't know what the problem is, then you can just wander all over the place looking for a solution. It's like the drunkard who was leaning against the light post looking at the ground, and somebody came over and said, what's your problem? He said, I lost my keys. And the person said, I'll help you. Where'd you lose them? He says, over there in the dark. And he said, well, why are you looking here? He says, there's light here. So no matter how much he looks there, he's never going to find his keys. So we have to know what the problem is. The problem is my keys are over there. I better, get some light over there to find my keys. So what Einstein would do, he would read all of the literature. He'd study up on it. This stuff didn't just come to him, without any context. He would read all of the literature, what other people wrote, what experiments were done, and then he would just sit with it, think about it. And then there'd be moments when he didn't think about it. He said he would just feel certain kinds of patterns in his body, and he would manipulate these patterns around. I don't know what they were. I mean, if they were feelings or their shapes or their sensations, until he saw something clicked in place. When it clicked in place, he said, well, maybe that's the solution. And then he would try to write it down mathematically, the sensations that he had in his body. And he would write it down, and he would look at it, and he'd look at all the previous experiments, and then he'd come to the conclusion that in his equations, there's no gravity. And he'd say, oh, that didn't work. I'm going to have to go back and think about that again. And then he'd go and think about it, and then he would feel these patterns again until his mathematics agreed with the experiments. So when you're working on a koan, you need to know what you're doing. For example, you have to read the koan carefully and memorize it so you really know what it's about. And that you know the intent of the Zen master in the koan. So there's a koan, case 7 of the Mumonkan. Mumonkan is a gateless gate, is a collection of koans we use in our practice. A monk asked Joshu in all earnestness, And he says he asked him in all earnestness. That's important. In all earnestness. It doesn't say the monk casually asked Joshu, hey dude, what's this Zen thing about? No, he was really earnest. And he says, I've just entered the monastery. I beg you, please give me instruction. It's interesting, actually. A couple of you are working on this koan right now, so listen carefully. And Joshu said, have you eaten your rice gruel yet? And the monk said, yes, I have. And then Joshu said, then wash your bowls. And it says, and then the monk attained some realization. Now, what are they talking about? Are they talking about rice gruel and washing bowls? On one level they are, definitely. But what's the purpose of the koan? There's the last line, the monk attained some realization. The purpose of koans is to open our Dharma eye so that we can reveal our true self. In every one of the koans you encounter, they're talking about that at some level. So I've just entered the monastery. Please give me instruction. Have you had a taste yet of Zen? And the monk says, oh yes, I have. I've had a taste. And know what Joshu's instruction was? Wash away every trace of that. Wash it away. And the monk realized something. So what does this koan tell us? That when we have a good experience, we hold on to it. We don't want to let it go. And when we have a bad experience, we obsess over it. Did you hear what they said to me? I mean, why did they say that to me? And who do they think they are? I could have said something back to them. I should have. I should have told them what a miserable SOB that person was. You know? They had no right to tell me that. And on and on and on and on and on. Wash your bowls. We all have these dialogues in our head, go over and over and over again. You know, one of the problems with koans is you might be able to figure it out, like I just told you, but you have to embody it. That's why we have you sit with it, so that it penetrates through the pores of your skin and into the marrow of your bones, so that we're constantly washing our bowls. We're not holding on to regrets. We're not holding on to vendettas. And even when we have wonderful experiences, we keep trying to recreate them rather than living in the present moment and taking care of things. You might be sitting in meditation, thinking about Joshu's wash your bowls, and then sitting and not thinking about it. And when you're sitting and sitting, some insight might come up. That's it. That's what he meant. Is that what he meant? That's where your thinking comes in. Test it. Is your understanding gold, or is it just the light reflecting off a piece of mica? How do you test it? How do you know? Well, does it agree with the Dharma? Does it agree with the teachings of the Buddha? When he was enlightened, the Buddha said, I and all beings everywhere are simultaneously enlightened. I and all beings on the great earth have simultaneously realized the enlightened way. That's what he preached. That's one of the things he preached. But what does it mean? It means all together we're one. There's no separation. Does your answer to the koan agree with that or disagree with it? If there's any separation in your response to the koan, then you better forget it and try something else. That's what I mean by think. There was I think, I don't remember when he died, but it's in the last century, a well-known Japanese Zen master who came to this country, who I had the fortune of meeting on occasion, Soen Nakagawa. And he was the abbot of Ryotakaji, and my first teacher, Sochu Roshi, was his student who became the abbot of Ryotakaji Monastery. And I heard the story about Soen Roshi, who was talking to a biblical scholar. And Soen Roshi said to him, "What were the last words that Christ uttered on the cross?" And the scholar said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And Soen said, "No, he didn't say that." And he said, "What do you mean?" He said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And so I said, no, he didn't say that. And he says, "Okay, look it. I'm a biblical scholar, and I know those are the last words that Christ uttered on the cross, were my God, why have you forsaken me?" And he said, "If you know more than I do, you tell me, what did he say?" And Soen Roshi jumped up, threw out his arms like this, put his head to the side, and he went, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Do you see the difference? The scholar, for him, it was just something that was over there that he learned about. It wasn't part of his experience. Soen was just demonstrating that right there he was Christ on the cross. And he was uttering the words in the way that Christ uttered them. So when you work on a koan, you need to see eye to eye with a Zen master. And we say your eyebrows are his eyebrows, or in some cases, her eyebrows. So it's not a matter of play acting. Soen wasn't play acting. He was actually becoming one with the Christ. So whenever an understanding comes up for you, test it. Like I talked about, like Einstein would do. Of course, the best koans are those that come out of your life experience, and each one of these koans, if you take it correctly, is part of your life experience. Make it your life. It's not just two men or women talking thousands of years ago. It's your life. And if these koans don't impact your life, then they're not doing their job, or you're not doing your job. I've talked about this too many times, but I'm going to talk about it again. The experience I had when I was an oceanographer with Master Tozan's koan, where he said, a monk asked him, "How do you avoid the discomfort of hot and cold?" And Master Tozan said, "Go to that place where there is no hot and cold." And the monk said, "Where is that place?" And Tozan said, "When you're hot, be hot. And when you're cold, be cold." So when I was working as an oceanographer, we were developing this device to keep deep sea divers warm. And I won't go into the technical details, but I was testing it in a tank next to the ocean. It was a tank that was 40 feet deep, and they were pumping cold ocean water through it. It was cold. And so I put on the device along with several other people, and we were all instrumented for heartbeat, blood pressure, and body core temperature, and all that sort of thing. And when I went in, and we didn't have wetsuits, it was the device that hooked to the breathing, to the air tank, and between the air tank and the breathing mask. And I went to the bottom and sat there, and it was cold. I'm telling you, it was cold. I just had on a bathing suit, and I don't know what the temperature was. The water temperature was probably in the 60s or something like that. And so I remembered this koan of Tozan when I was sitting there. When you're cold, be cold. So I decided I would examine what cold was. And I noticed every sensation. It was interesting. If I didn't breathe, I didn't get cold. When I breathed, the bubbles came out and they popped on my face under the mask, and wherever they popped, it was cold. If I didn't move, it didn't cold. If I moved, I could feel the cold water moving under my arms, and I'd start feeling cold. I just noticed. I just examined it carefully. Just what's going on here? What is cold? And just be cold. What is cold? And finally, somebody tapped on one of the glass ports, and told me to go to the surface, which I did. And the person who was running the experiment told me that I'd stayed down there longer than anybody else, and my body core temperature didn't change that much. And he wanted to know what I was doing down there. Of course, I didn't want to tell him because we were doing the experiments for the Navy, and then they might classify meditation. But it was amazing. I was down there probably 4 or 5 times longer than anybody else could stay down there because their body core temperature would change. And I didn't get cold after that. I did some more diving in the ocean just for research I was doing. And in some places where the water is cold, nobody wanted to go in. I said, I'll go in and check some instruments. But it wore off. So the lesson there was, if you really become one with something, it doesn't bother you. It disappears. The cold essentially disappeared for me when I was being one with it. And the other thing is that if you don't keep practicing it, you lose it. Like a downhill skier. Same thing with meditation. You think, oh, well, I got that meditation figured out. No, it's a lifetime practice. We keep doing it. Why do we keep doing it? Well, I'll leave that as a koan. But you can apply something like this to all kinds of things in your life. If you're upset, just be upset. Don't obsess over it. I'm upset. I shouldn't be upset. I mean, when I'm upset, I'm not happy. I want to be happy. No, just be upset. What happens if you're upset? What is it? What is upset? It's not all your thoughts about it. It's what you're feeling in your body. Just stay present with it. So if you sit quietly and just hold the koan with you, sometimes how to engage it just pops out of your mind. Just pops up and you go, aha, that's it. I read about Gandhi in India when they were politically strategizing how to free themselves from the colonial British. His lieutenants would have all kinds of ideas about their strategy, what they should do, what they shouldn't do, and he'd listen carefully to all of them. And then I read that he would just retire and meditate, empty himself out. And then when he did that, what he wanted to do would just arise, would just come up for him. Well, I was in my 20s, in the 60s, where the theme was to turn on, tune in, turn on, and drop out, I think is how it went, if I remember correctly. But when I started practicing Zen, I said, if you really want to be free, you have to be disciplined. There's no freedom without discipline. And that's what our practice brings to us. You can't accomplish anything. I mean, a lot of the musicians at that time, they practiced a lot. They weren't like, playing air guitars. I mean, they really practiced, even though they might have had songs of Age of Aquarius, but they really worked hard. They were disciplined. So that's what our practice is. It has to come from the inside. You have to really want to do it. So you might look at a koan initially, and it might seem as though it's outside yourself. But you have to bring it in. You have to internalize it. Think about it and think about it. Think about it some more and then think about it. And then when you're done thinking about it, don't think about it. And then let it arise. So a monk asked Joshu, does a dog have Buddha nature or no? And Joshu said, moo. That's often the first koan. We call it a breakthrough koan. Does a dog have Buddha nature or not? What is a monk asking? Is he really asking, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? Is he asking, do I have Buddha nature or not? Or maybe he's saying, if Joshu says that a dog has Buddha nature, then probably there's some hope for me, that maybe I have some Buddha nature. But he's very earnest. Does a dog have Buddha nature? And Joshu said, moo. Now, moo is translated as not, but that's not what it means here. Joshu is demonstrating Buddha nature to this monk with that moo. So when you sit and working with moo, just internalize it. We say to inhale all of your thoughts, all of your judgments, all of your opinions, all of your projections, and when you exhale, it's just moo, moo. Put everything into it. Everything becomes a one taste of moo. I heard from years ago from Robert Aiken Roshi, who's now deceased, that even after he was a Roshi, when the phone would ring, he would let it ring an extra time, and he would go moo with the sound of the phone ringing, and then pick it up, and then he would be centered, or whatever it is, If it's good news, bad news, or somebody trying to sell you a new warranty on your automobile. So life is a continuous koan. And when you're studying with me, sometimes I'll ask you how that koan applies to your life. So we need to penetrate into it, just like we need to penetrate into our life. Like Dogen said, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. We study the self, we see what our life is about. But when we study it carefully, we forget it, like Master Eka. It's ungraspable. Then Dogen went on, to forget the self is to be enlightened by the 10,000 dharmas. In other words, everything in our life is an enlightened experience. And that's how we manifest this enlightened life. by not adding anything extra that doesn't belong. So this session is the beginning of our 90-day ongo period. So I just encourage you to discipline yourself. If you want true freedom, discipline yourself. Don't allow yourself to drift off into fantasies about what could or should be, but just stay present, particularly when you're meditating. Just feel the rising and falling of your breath and drop off all of your attachments and then see what arises. So thus I encourage you. When I was in Mexico years ago, I learned poco a poco se va lejos. Means little by little, you can go a very long way. So one breath at a time, let's just keep going. Thank you.